Among the outlaw motorcycle gangs of America, one name stands out for sheer brutality, ambition, and the chaos he left in his wake: Keith "Conan" Richter. Once a towering enforcer for the Pagans Motorcycle Club, Conan rose through the ranks with iron fists and ruthless loyalty. He helped shape the Pagans into one of the most feared gangs on the East Coast. But like many men who climbed too high, his downfall came just as violently as his rise. This is the story of the wild rise and fall of Conan, Pagan Nation's Iron Fist. Pagan Nation. To understand Conan, you first have to understand the Pagans MC. Founded in 1959 in Maryland, the Pagans started out as a small club of motorcycle enthusiasts. But by the 1970s, they were no longer just a brotherhood of bikers. They were an organized criminal empire. Drugs, extortion, gun running, and violence became their calling cards. Unlike their rivals, the Hells Angels, who flaunted their colors in international chapters, the Pagans kept their empire tight and secretive. Their colors were blue and gray, their territory the eastern seaboard from New Jersey to Virginia. Into this world stepped Keith "Conan" Richter. Enter Conan. Conan wasn't just another biker. Standing tall with a frame built like a heavyweight brawler, Conan commanded respect the moment he entered a room. His nickname wasn't for nothing. He looked like a warrior ripped straight from a comic book. But what set him apart wasn't just his size. It was his temper, his ruthlessness, and his absolute loyalty to Pagan Nation. In the Pagans, loyalty mattered more than money, more than even blood. And Conan proved himself time and time again, whether it was enforcing debts, protecting Pagan territory, or leading retaliatory strikes against rival gangs. By the late 1990s, Conan had become one of the club's most feared enforcers. The Pagan Wars. The late 90s and early 2000s were violent years for Pagan Nation. Their biggest enemies? The Hells Angels. The Pagans and Angels had fought bloody wars since the 1970s, with battles erupting in New Jersey, Long Island, and Philadelphia. Bars became war zones. Stabbings, shootings, and all-out brawls were regular headlines. Conan thrived in this chaos. He was the man the Pagans turned to when they needed muscle. One infamous clash came in 2002 in Long Island, where Pagans and Hells Angels squared off during a motorcycle expo. Shots were fired, one man died, and dozens were injured. Law enforcement later described it as a biker battlefield, and right there, in the thick of it, was Conan. Rise to power. As the years passed, Conan wasn't just a soldier, he became a leader. By the mid-2000s, he had climbed the ranks, eventually taking on the role of national president of the Pagans. Under his leadership, the club expanded aggressively. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and even down into Florida, the Pagan patch began spreading faster than ever before, but with growth came heat. Federal investigators began paying close attention to Conan's reign. Wiretaps, undercover agents, and informants all circled Pagan Nation like sharks. Conan didn't care. He ruled with fear. Disloyalty was punished swiftly. Rivals were crushed. Even members who crossed him weren't safe. Pagan Nation versus law enforcement. Conan's rise put him directly in the crosshairs of law enforcement. The ATF, FBI, and DEA all had active cases against the Pagans. In one operation, federal agents infiltrated Pagan meetings and caught discussions about weapons trafficking and drug routes. Still, despite repeated arrests and investigations, Conan always seemed to bounce back. Like many outlaw leaders, he had a reputation for being untouchable. But the higher you climb, the harder you fall. The fall in 2021, Conan's empire began to unravel. During a Pagan event in New Jersey, Conan was caught on video making violent threats. He talked about smash-on-sight orders, meaning that any Pagan who saw a rival, especially a Hells Angel, was to attack immediately. Federal prosecutors seized on this as proof of his leadership role in organized violent crime. In July 2021, Conan was arrested by the ATF. The charges: felon in possession of a firearm. For years, he had been the face of Pagan Nation. Now he was facing federal prison time. Inside the cage court documents painted Conan as the embodiment of the Pagan threat. Prosecutors highlighted his long history of violence. They described him as dangerous, unpredictable, and a menace to public safety. His defense? That he was just another biker, unfairly targeted for being part of a motorcycle club. But the jury didn't buy it. In 2022, Conan was sentenced to 33 months in federal prison. The once mighty enforcer, the Iron Fist of Pagan Nation, was reduced to just another inmate in the system. The legacy of fear. Conan's downfall sent shockwaves through Pagan Nation. Some saw him as a martyr, a leader who paid the price for standing up to law enforcement and rivals alike. Others whispered that his reckless leadership brought too much heat to the club. Either way, his impact can't be denied. For nearly 3 decades, Conan was the face of pagan brutality. He embodied everything the club stood for: loyalty, violence, and defiance. But in the end, even Pagan Nation's Iron Fist couldn't beat the weight of the law. Pagan Nation after Conan. When Conan went down, the Pagan Nation was forced to adapt. For decades, the Pagans had thrived under fear and violence, with leaders like Conan steering the ship. But after his arrest and sentencing, the club faced more than just the loss of their Iron Fist. They faced growing pressure from law enforcement. The FBI and ATF had new momentum. Dozens of pagan members and associates were indicted in the months following Conan's trial. Bars once safe for pagan colors were raided. Meetings were monitored. Everywhere the club turned, the eyes of the law were watching. But outlaw motorcycle clubs have a way of surviving. For the pagans, Conan's fall wasn't the end. It was just another chapter. The younger generation saw his rise as inspiration, while older members whispered warnings about his mistakes. Conan was too loud, some said, too reckless. But others argued that without men like Conan, the pagan name wouldn't carry the same fear on the streets. One thing was certain: even behind prison walls, Conan's reputation loomed large. His name still carried weight in the bars, the biker rallies, and the back rooms where deals were struck. The myth of Conan. Every outlaw story eventually blurs the line between fact and legend. Conan's is no different. To law enforcement, he was a criminal, a violent felon who brought chaos wherever he went. To the public, he was a headline, the big tattooed biker president thrown into a cage. But to Pagan Nation, and to those who rode alongside him, Conan became something more. A myth, a warrior who never backed down, a man who rose from the rank and file to sit at the top of one of America's most feared motorcycle clubs. Of course, myths come with lessons. Conan's story is a warning about the cost of outlaw life. Power doesn't last forever. Every fist eventually weakens. Every empire eventually crumbles. And yet, as long as Pagan Nation rides, Conan's name will ride with them, whispered in bars, shouted in rallies, carried in the roar of engines on the highway. The Iron Fist may have fallen, but the legend of Conan remains. Brotherhood-tested outlaw clubs are built on brotherhood, but when a leader like Conan falls, that brotherhood is tested. Inside the Pagan Nation, old rivalries resurfaced. Some factions wanted to keep Conan's vision alive. Violent, uncompromising, unapologetically pagan. Others wanted to steer the club toward lower heat, smaller crimes, and away from the spotlight that Conan had drawn. Meetings became tense. Voices were raised. Some even whispered about betrayal, about whether members had secretly helped law enforcement bring Conan down. In the outlaw world, paranoia runs deep, and once a president falls, the knives come out. Yet through it all, the Pagan Nation survived. They patched in new blood. They expanded into states that had never seen the blue and white colors before. Conan may have been gone, but his style of leadership left behind a blueprint, one that some brothers still tried to follow, while others tried to escape. The Pagan Nation had always been known for its unpredictability, but now it was a club divided between Conan's ghost and its own future. Keith "Conan" Richter rose from enforcer to president, leading the Pagans through some of their bloodiest years. His reign was built on fear, power, and absolute loyalty. But his story also serves as a reminder. In the outlaw world, the higher you rise, the closer you get to the fall. This was the wild rise and fall of Conan, Pagan Nation's Iron Fist. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story from the dark world of outlaw motorcycle clubs.